Most people who believe they are awake are still asleep, only dreaming they've awakened. And the shocking truth is, there's a final test no one warned you about. You've been told that awakening is a milestone, that once you cross a certain point, through meditation, retreats, or endless study, you arrive. But look around. How many are carrying certificates of transcendence while still drowning in the same storms of fear, anger, and desire? How many speak like gurus, yet live like prisoners of their own mind? Awakening, for most, becomes a dream of awakening, nothing more than another identity to wear. The final test is invisible because it hides in plain sight. It is not found in temples, not taught by masters, not handed down through secret rituals. It happens in silence, when the machinery of seeking finally collapses. For as long as you chase enlightenment, you remain bound to the same game you think you've outgrown. Seeking is still the mask of the seeker. Chasing is still the identity of the one who believes something is missing. Think of it like climbing a mountain with burning lungs, desperate to touch the summit, only to realize the peak was always beneath your feet. You never needed to climb, yet you couldn't see that until exhaustion stripped away the illusion of progress. The final test reveals itself in that moment of surrender, when you stop trying to transcend, when you release the obsession with passing, when you let the mountain dissolve. What falls away is every role you thought you had to play: the perfect partner, the loyal child, the spiritual aspirant, even the image of awakened one. They peel off like old skin under sunlight, not because you reject them, but because they no longer fit. And in their place, something raw emerges, the truth that was buried under layers of seeking. This revelation is not a reward for effort. It is the collapse of effort itself. You pass not by conquering, but by surrendering. You awaken not by adding light, but by shedding shadows. And suddenly, what you thought you were striving toward is seen for what it always was: your own reflection, waiting patiently beneath the noise of your striving. When the masks begin to fall, a deeper question arises. What now fills the space they once occupied? The collapse of identity is not just the loss of roles, it is the unveiling of a new way of seeing. This is where the final test reveals its subtler face. Awakening is not simply the absence of illusions, it is the birth of a vision that perceives beyond the veil of appearances. Many stumble here because they cling to the surface, trying to rebuild new masks in place of the old ones. Yet if you remain in the nakedness of being, something extraordinary begins to stir. Ordinary consciousness is bound to the senses, locked inside a narrow frame of perception. It sees only 3 dimensions, confined by linear time. Past is memory, future is fantasy, and the present is reduced to fleeting moments. But the shift of vision that comes with the final test dismantles this confinement. Suddenly, past, present, and future feel less like separate boxes and more like a single whole, existing simultaneously. You begin to notice currents of possibility, subtle echoes of what is about to unfold, as though reality were whispering its patterns before they take shape. Ancient traditions spoke of this faculty as the mind of Christ, the place where ordinary reason ends and a higher perception takes over. To the natural mind, such awareness seems impossible, even foolish. Yet through the collapse of striving, through the surrender of needing to transcend, this deeper perception emerges. You no longer rely solely on the senses to tell you what is real. Instead, imagination itself becomes a gateway, a faculty not of fantasy, but of vision. When you feel an unseen state so vividly that it becomes more real than external appearances, you step into the larger dimension of being. The irony is that seekers often miss this stage because they are still busy measuring progress, still comparing paths, still asking if they've arrived. That very questioning holds them prisoner in 3-dimensional thought. The final test demands the release of that need to measure. Only then can the mind disengage from the prison of appearances and discover its true freedom. It is not effort that opens this vision, it is the collapse of effort. It is not grasping at the future, it is inhabiting the timeless present where all futures coexist. Here, the shift of vision reveals its true connection to the test. You pass not by escaping this world, but by recognizing that you already inhabit both worlds at once. The three-dimensional reality continues, but it is no longer your cage. You can function in it while knowing it is only a shadow of something larger. Problems lose their weight because you see the patterns shaping them. Time loosens its grip because you sense the wholeness beyond it. And this shift is not theoretical. It is the lived recognition that the final test is not about leaving reality behind, but about learning to see it through awakened eyes. The shift of vision changes how you see reality, but the collapse of identity changes how you see yourself. Once perception expands beyond the narrow lens of the senses, the identities that once anchored your existence begin to feel foreign. And this is where the final test intensifies. It does not simply ask if you can see differently. It asks if you are willing to let go of the person you thought you were. For many, this becomes the breaking point, because identities are the scaffolding of meaning. When they crumble, the illusion of security crumbles with them. Relationships dissolve, sometimes quietly, sometimes with upheaval, because the old frequency no longer resonates. Careers built over decades lose all sense of purpose overnight. Masks you wore without question suddenly weigh like iron armor. The spiritual seeker identity, once worn proudly, becomes another costume too heavy to bear. And here lies the paradox of the final test. Nothing is taken from you by force. Identities fall away because they no longer stick. They simply cannot coexist with the space of awakened perception that has begun to open within you. This collapse feels like death, yet it is the most sacred form of rebirth. The seeker often expects awakening to add something: light, bliss, extraordinary power. But the test reveals the opposite. Awakening subtracts, it strips, it dismantles everything that is not essential. What you thought was growth through accumulation shows itself as an illusion. The real expansion happens through surrender, through allowing the controlled demolition of everything false. In that apparent destruction lies liberation, because what remains is the core of being, untouchable, unshakable, real. And as identities fall, a space emerges. Suddenly you are no longer fused with every emotion, every story, every thought. Anger can burn through you without defining you. Sadness can flow without drowning you. Fear can grip without freezing you. The test strips you bare until you discover the silent observer within, the one who watches but is never consumed. This observer was always there, hidden beneath the noise of roles and performances. Now it stands revealed as the essence of who you are. This stage of the final test transforms the way challenges are experienced. Problems no longer appear as enemies to be conquered, but as patterns of energy waiting to be rearranged. Crises that once felt like collapse reveal themselves as invitations to refinement. Every ending shows itself as a beginning, wearing a disguise. In losing who you thought you were, you begin to recognize who you have always been. And it is here, in the nakedness of being, that the test shifts from destruction into revelation. When the collapse of identity has stripped you bare, life itself begins to rearrange around your new state of being. The final test is not only an inner event, it reverberates outward, reorganizing the world you inhabit. What once clung to you through need, fear, or dependency falls away, not by confrontation, but by simple incompatibility. Just as a magnet drops what it no longer attracts, your frequency shifts and your entire reality reshapes in silence. The people who once fed on your energy, the drama creators, the constant complainers, the subtle manipulators, disappear as if the universe quietly erased them from your script. No dramatic farewells are necessary. No arguments or accusations are required. They simply stop calling, conversations fade, invitations dry up. And in their place, new connections arrive, people who meet you at the depth of authenticity, who are drawn to your presence not for what they can take, but for the resonance they feel. The final test proves itself here. You no longer negotiate with frequencies that do not belong to you. Life organizes the cast of characters without your interference. This reorganization also takes form in the body and the nervous system. The fight or flight reflex, once a constant companion, no longer rules your responses. Stress no longer hijacks your being. Time itself bends. Moments dilate into eternities. Hours collapse into instants. The nervous system has adapted to the new state, allowing presence to be the default. What feels like mystical transformation is simply the removal of interference. Consciousness now flows unobstructed, and with it comes sensitivity to patterns and possibilities that were always present but previously hidden beneath noise. And as your life reorganizes, your service in the world begins, not through effort, not through teaching, not through the creation of another identity, but through the silent transmission of presence. Without trying, you have become a mirror. Some find deep comfort in your steadiness, as if resting on solid ground after years of storm. Others feel unease because your peace exposes their inner turmoil. Yet both responses serve. The test continues here because you are asked to remain unshaken, neither inflated by admiration nor disturbed by resistance. The reorganization of life reveals the deeper logic of the final test. You are not here to escape the world, but to inhabit it differently. Your presence itself becomes the teaching. Every encounter, from the cashier at the store to the stranger in passing, becomes a moment of silent transmission. The drama no longer sticks, the chaos no longer destabilizes, because you have ceased to operate on the same frequency. The world reorganizes, and you discover that the final test is not the end of something. It is the beginning of living as what you truly are. Now, here lies the greatest paradox. The test never ends. The moment you declare yourself enlightened, ego has built a new prison. The moment you wear awakening as an identity, you fall back asleep. Awakening is not a crown to wear. It is a continuous surrender, a constant refusal to return to the old games of identity. Living in this awareness does not mean escaping the world. Bills still need paying, bodies still need care, relationships still require presence, but everything is approached with a different quality of consciousness. Nothing is trivial because the sacred and the mundane have merged. Making breakfast, sitting in traffic, paying rent, all are lived with the same depth once reserved for retreats and rituals. Your presence creates invisible ripples. Tension dissolves in rooms you enter. Chaos organizes without effort, not because you project mystical energy, but because your absence of resistance allows reality to harmonize itself. You serve without trying to serve. You teach without trying to teach. You live, and through living, others glimpse their own forgotten truth. But vigilance remains. Ego waits at every turn, ready to appropriate the experience, ready to whisper, "Now you are special." The test continues as long as you breathe, yet vigilance is not strain. It is relaxed awareness, like a surfer who feels the wave beneath his feet without calculating every move. And so the circle completes. What began as the dream of awakening becomes the lived reality of presence. What began as seeking ends as finding, by realizing there was never anything missing. The final test was not to reach the summit, but to see that you were already there. You have been told that awakening is about effort, progress, and attainment, but the truth is simpler and far more radical. The final test is not passed by striving, but by surrender. Not by escaping humanity, but by embracing it fully. Not by becoming more, but by shedding what was never you. And now the invitation is in your hands. Stop searching for confirmation outside yourself. Stop waiting for recognition from masters or movements. You already know, because you feel it in the quiet space between thoughts, in the dissolving of drama, in the presence that has begun to guide your every step. Live from that place. Let your authenticity be the revolution. The final test is already here. You only need to recognize that you've passed.